Life's atypical, baby. Welcome to Atypical Podcast, where we talk about life's uncertainties, change, and unexpected twists, and find solutions together. This is not the secret. There's no wonderful catchphrase that you can use to solve all your life's problems. It's just us being humans and talking about how it feels, what we can do when change happens, and how to have compassion for oneself and others while navigating this crazy life. We'll laugh, we'll cry, but we're here together. Let's get some stuff off my chest. Because life isn't typical, it's atypical. Hi, and welcome to Atypical Podcast. My name is Amie Archibald-Varley. Of course, I have a special guest. It is none other than my lovely husband, Jordan Varley, who I've dragged along on this journey. Jordan is my husband, and he's autistic. It's kind of a big deal that he's here, so please feel free to cheer him on. Yeah. Well, I think maybe I'll let him explain a little bit more about himself.
I am a counseling therapist, and and I work mostly with tweens and teenagers.
You got the fun bunch.
I got the fun bunch.
Yeah, seriously. So, well, let's really just dive into what we're talking about today. And I think it's actually important to have this conversation because this is really why I want to start Atypical Podcast to begin with. Because I kept on having this sense that, at some point in time, everything is going to settle down. The dust will settle. And it actually made me have a lot of anxiety. I was always really anxious because there's always like, okay, when's this next new thing? This thing's going to happen, but then like that'll go away and, just we'll be coasting. We'll just have this normalcy of life. And for whatever reason, it just never really happened. So I think today's episode will be just discussing the idea that life is not linear. There's this fallacy or this idea that we have to live this straight and narrow path. There's these societal expectations of you. You grow up, you get a really good job, you find the love of your life, you get married, you have kids, and then like everyone's making like bento box lunches and, you're living life in the sunset. Everyone's posting their like best self on Instagram, but like life's not really like that. But the fact of the matter is there's this illusion of linearity. And I think that's what really messes a lot of people up. And it messed me up for a long time because I'm just like, I feel like I'm not in the place that I'm supposed to be in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. You're always waiting for the moment where you can take your foot off the gas.
Yeah.
And then that moment doesn't seem to come. And you're like, okay, well, if I redouble my efforts and I try to grind hard for a shorter period of time, then after that, I'll be able to take my foot off the gas and be content. And then contentment itself seems kind of elusive.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It's really kind of messed up that society expects this linear life. Like we mentioned, that straight path of a school, job, marriage, kids, retirement. It adds so much unnecessary pressure. And, there is no linear life path. Life is really full of twists, turns, setbacks, and unexpected opportunities. Let's talk about our own stories and experiences. Let's listen to Jordan's story as he describes his experience of not charting the course as someone who is neurodivergent.
I mean, I was particularly aware of it when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of my various diagnoses and stuff at that moment in time. And I was really struggling socially and stuff like that. So I didn't seem to really fit in. And it's really that kind of common neurodivergent experience of feeling like you're an alien. Like I just felt like I just was kind of out of sync. I just felt like I wasn't quite figuring it out and hitting all the milestones. So yeah, no, I felt that kind of feeling of dislocation. And then after university, I really felt that way too. But that's because I was a dumbass and I did a undergraduate degree in English and philosophy. So
I don't know if I'd say that you're a dumbass. I mean, I think that everyone has to make their choices. And it wasn't a bad choice. It was just a choice that you made, and it was something that you're interested in doing. And I think, again, maybe that speaks to this whole idea of like this path. You felt that doing philosophy and English was fruitless, but time and time again, you've used it in so many instances, whether it's, talking about politics or reasoning with someone who might be unreasonable using various different theories. It comes in handy. So you may think that, doing this degree was useless, but time and time again, it's proved to be not useless. And you've actually made it out to be like a funny part of your life too, because you've made me laugh a lot about some of the stuff that you've said and learned from English and philosophy, like the Nobu Gubu Jubu. I can't remember what was the name of that book.
Oh, Yanoya.
Yanoya.
Yeah, that was
It was a
interesting
Noya.
book. Well, I was a terrible English student because I was such a good philosophy student. I didn't realize that the two were so antithetical. So the better I got at philosophy, the worse I got at English. So
Right.
that was just kind of the way the cookie crumbled. But I think that was kind of a very traditional millennial experience. Like you finish university with any degree and you're like, I got it. Right. And you're like, because people are going to see that if I can do an English major, then I could be an administrative assistant or do anything that requires writing and reading comprehension because I read Chaucer.
Right.
Like anything else is pretty much Bush League. And then that was kind of the time period, kind of rise of neoliberalism and stuff like that, where, you had to have the exact requirements for the job, the exact degree or college diploma. And English and philosophy were not specific enough, which was really disappointing because there's so many, as you said, transferable skills. So that was the part where I regretted it afterward. And also I had no plan. Like that was another thing. Like I went to university because I knew I didn't expect to go to university. And then once I got into university, I was like, all right, I'm here and I'm doing the things that everybody seems to do who's successful. Right. And then I got in for one degree, and then for stupid reasons, this was truly stupid reasons. It was very much my inability to adapt that I switched my degree, and it was just like, I just did it because it was what I thought was expected and mapped out for a success, but not knowing that it wasn't a straight line. Like I just felt like, if I do these things, success will fall into my lap. And then when I did all those things with a huge amount of debt and time invested, I ended up at the other end with a job at a call center working with high school graduates with a $40,000 degree.
Oh, you used $40,000 worth of debt. Not like
100%.
The degree did cost $40,000, but it was the debt.
Yeah. So I mean, there could have, like, if I could go back, I mean, I don't love, like, everybody's like, I don't live with regret. No, I got regret. And that's, if I could have done it again, I mean, I would have probably picked a degree that would have been more professional oriented, meaning that it would have led to a job.
See, this is where I think you're actually hitting on a point, which I was actually going to circle to, where, there's these expectations where you finish university and you have a job right out that's aligned with your university degree. And again, this is these life stories, these life paths, these things that you're taught or you're expected that it's like, I finished this degree, I'm going to leave the university and I'm going to actually work in this trade or this profession. And I'd say 9 times out of 10 that is not the case. So unless you're doing for example, nursing, but it's you do this degree, but you're not necessarily going to be doing what you did unless you continue to further your education. So more money, master's degree, more money, PhD, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of a part of this fallacy of you do this and then it's this. But it's not true, and it never really works out that way. And it's very frustrating. And I think if I think about my first kind of moment where I was like, oh, okay, life's not meeting my expectations, it wasn't really in relation to work or school. It was more in relation to relationships, this expectation about love. And I think maybe we'll talk about this in my other episodes, but my parents didn't really pull the wool over my eyes because their relationship wasn't the greatest. I mean, it's better now, but it wasn't really the greatest. But there was still this societal expectation, based on movies and various different things that, you're going to meet this person, they're going to tell you all these great things, and then they're in love with you, you're in love with them, and you're going to get married, and this person's going to be your soulmate. And I think this is the thing that we kind of gloss over in education, and particularly maybe it was just partially my upbringing too, where, you know, the whole idea behind marriage is it's a sanctified thing. And once you do this, then, you know, all will be right in the world and you'll find your life mate and that will be your partner. And I remember watching like all my friends, you know, dating in high school and stuff. And I was like the skinny, awkward kid, not really so cool. And being like, well, you know, hopefully someone will like me. And the first person who liked me and showed interest, I was like, oh, yo, this is it. This is going to be my life mate. And, you know, again, that person tells you that they love you and you fall down this path of being like, okay, so now they told me I love me. It's the next step, which is, you know, sorry, mom. But anyways.
Holding hands.
Yes. With your legs. No. So, I mean, yeah. So the next step was like, you know, this person has told me that they love me and they're like, yeah, we should have sex. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. It was not a great idea. And it was a horrible experience. And then this person cheated on me and then was like, this is high school drama, but it was like, my heart was broken. And that was the first life lesson of being like, this Disney princess stuff isn't real life. And it was earth shattering for me because I was just like, oh, I thought this is how things were supposed to go. And it didn't. Kind of sucked.
Yeah, no. I mean, based on all the criteria that you just like that, you know, you have in your head from media and from just kind of like this implied whatever. Yeah, starting from those ages. I mean, I'm not talking about sex specifically, but relationships and like, oh, I need to have a girlfriend. So I got a girlfriend in grade 7, 6. Duh. And I didn't even know what to do with it. I was
Hold hands.
Like, yeah, I was just like, but I didn't like, I mean, I was already struggling socially, but I was just like, all right. I felt like there's just like a lot of pressure to fit in, and you got the girlfriend in grade 6. I mean, Jesus Christ. In grade 6, you're what, 11, 12?
Yeah, that's wild. Girlfriend.
Yeah,
what?
like I didn't know what to do with a
Yeah, that's
girl
wild.
in terms of like talking to them or relating to them. I could barely relate to anybody else, let alone a girl, and have those relationship dynamics.
But again, it's like the reality of the world because, like, I mean, we'll talk about this on further episodes where we are like shielding our kids from things like Roblox because, you know, they're sending nudes at 13 years old, right?
Well, ours aren't.
Well, ours are not.
Some kids
that
are.
we know of. But, you know, these things are happening. And foiled again. Whether it was university or the expectations that, you know, Disney princess movies of the 90s showed us about love and relationships. Yeah, just not right. So again, what do we do when those ideas of society's expectations don't align with what's actually happening in the moment? It makes us feel kind of icky. Us feeling we need to be on this path, and now the path that we feel that we're not on, how it affects us. It's devastating. Like the mental health ramifications are huge. And I think people don't even think about the fact that, you know, if you think that you're supposed to be here and you're in another place, that's going to weigh really heavily on an individual. And I think that we don't even stop to think about like, okay, maybe this isn't how life should be. Like life is kind of like, you know, a roller coaster. It's up, it's down, it goes around a corner. You go into a dark tunnel for a little bit, like the Mind Buster. I think they fixed it, by the way. But yeah, it's just, it's a rocky road. And I think maybe what we should be saying is it's like, okay, so life isn't linear and we should expect these curves. And maybe if we expect that these things are going to happen, it won't be so devastating in terms of the impact. But I think you do have a little bit about what the science says about, you know, changes and life changes in relation to what happens when our realities don't match.
There's certainly something to be said for the fact that our brains are not really wired to be satisfied, right? And so when you expect that next thing...
Speak for yourself. No, I'm joking.
I've wired your brain to be satisfied.
Whoa, calm down now. Backtrack, back to the topic.
So our brains are designed to make us satisfied. Our brains are designed to constantly keep us in motion, grasping at things to try to get the next berry, to get the next whatever it is, resource. The thing is, our brains are designed to do two things fairly well, and they don't do it very well, but they just do it a lot. So what they lack in accuracy, they make up for in just perseverance. So our brains are really designed to try to predict the future, and they dwell on the past, but they do both in a negative way. So we have a negativity bias.
So what Jordan is referring to is the predictive processing theory. This is a neuroscience-based theory that suggests that the brain is essentially a prediction machine. It constantly tries to minimize the difference between what it expects based on past experiences and what it perceives, incoming sensory data. So again, the brain generates models of the world to predict what will happen next, and when there's a mismatch between predictions and reality, a prediction error, the brain updates its model or adjusts its behavior. This mechanism then helps us navigate the world efficiently, but it has its psychological side effects. Those negative predictions and anxiety, here they come.
So, and that was because our ancestors, in order to survive, the ones who were kind of worrywarts.
I mean, like the majority of people?
Well, this is why, because our ancestors, so this is a common example, not invented by me by any stretch of the imagination, but if our ancestors were like looking through a tree line, and then off in the distance, they saw something that with stripes on it through the trees. Say we have two ancestors who were our potential progenitors. Okay. So one ancestor assumed 8 out of 10 times that was a tiger and ran up a tree. But 2 out of the 10 times he was like, it's a lot of climbing. It's probably not a tiger. And then most of the time it wasn't a tiger. Right. It was just a rock with some shadows on it. Unfortunately for him, some percentage of that time there was a tiger and they got eaten. They did not go on to produce offspring. Right. The other ancestor, however, 100% of the time, ran up a tree and then waited to make sure that rock wasn't a tiger. Because that ancestor was super, super paranoid and super, super worried. Fortunately for us, that ancestor were the ones who procreated and passed on those worrywart genes and proclivities to the rest of us, which helped us survive. Unfortunately for us, fortunately for us, we're not in those situations where we're in open savannas or jungles or anything like that being hunted by apex predators. Unfortunately for us, the programming, the firmware that got uploaded into our brains at the very deepest of levels was, again, designed to help us survive, but not designed to help us be happy in a modern context where we're not worrying about those existential threats. So we need to figure out how to be content now in the present moment. And it's something we're really bad at, because if you're constantly looking into the future and trying to predict it in a negative way, that's called anxiety. And if you're reflecting on the past and dwelling on the past and really picking out the negative stuff and really bagging on yourself for it, that's really depression. Because these mechanisms forecast into the future, it's like, what do I need next? Oh, I want that next thing. I want that next thing that will make my life happy. Because we don't feel very happy and content now. Because we're always worrying about what's going to come next. Yeah, at the end of the day, our ancestors gave us genes that helped us survive in that context. We haven't evolved past that context because there's been no environmental pressures to do so. So we are stuck being warriors with this, proclivity for being kind of mean to ourselves.
Being hard on ourselves.
Yeah, too hard on ourselves. And so we're not really good at being in the moment and enjoying what we have and being content.
Okay, Jordan, hold that thought right there. Clearly, we have a predisposition for being negative Nancys or negative Terrys, and we will address that very soon in the episode. But let's talk about the pressures that we face right now, those pressures that say we should be charting a course. How does that make us feel? What are our experiences? I'm kind of thinking about myself, right? Like right now, the pressure is to be like, all right, I have to be successful. Everyone around me is successful. But the thing is like, what does successful look like? And it's made me it's kind of drawn into sharp relief to me. It's like, what are the things that actually really matter to me? And is it success that is what matters to me? And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I want to be successful, but not at the expense of. And I think that's kind of where one of the biggest pressures for me kind of lie, where it's just like, I have to do this. I have to be in this place. And it's like, no, this is kind of a journey and I should enjoy this journey. Like right now, as you know, because you're a part of the company, I'm enjoying learning about how to build a film production company and learning about the creative process of writing, but from a different standpoint, because I have already written a book, but what's it like writing, a short screenplay or writing a feature-length film or working on a documentary and then really translating that written word into a visual picture. And I don't want to move fast on that. I want to take time with it because it's something that I feel is important. And I think that now, as I've been reframing my thinking, that if success comes, then that's great. But I feel like I'm learning so much in this process that that's what's growing me and that's what's feeding me as a person at this point in time. But I know, like, if I just think of it on the surface, that's like one of those societal pressures or expectations that must be had.
Most proximally for me, I guess, it's kind of maybe one of two things. Getting, additional degrees, like my master's degree, is a big part of it.
But why do you feel, what societal pressure do you feel that you have to get more education?
All right. Well, so the thing is, nothing is monocausal, right? So I don't ever have, and most people don't have one motivation. Okay. They have multiple motivations. Now, obviously, one may be the leading motivation. I would like to say that it's not ego driven, that I want my master's degree. Well, maybe, but I'm hoping that's not the case.
Okay, but
I don't
you
think
deep
it is.
down know.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think part of it is, like, of course, I want the master's degree so I can say, hey, I have my master's degree. But I think based on my general level of fatigue and disinterest, that's not a leading cause. The primary reason I want to get my master's degree at this moment, other than just like, yay, because I know that's going to be fleeting, right? Like, that's my brain telling me it's going to be amazing. And this is we can get into that too, like this hedonic trap where your brain is like, this is going to be the best thing ever. Then you get it and your brain's like, this
what's
is 50%.
The pressure? I'm going to dig. What's the actual societal pressure that you feel?
Oh, it's 100% like, if I do this next thing, then I'll be able to get a job that is more in line with my temperament and will pay me enough money where I can have more leisure time.
But what's the pressure?
The pressure for me is being able to support my family.
And time.
And getting additional time back. So I'm investing time now in hopes that I can get a job that is less time consuming.
And I think that's what people can relate to, right? The fact that, it's not always about it's not just like, I just want a better job, or I shouldn't say it like that. It's like, I just want to have, to change the career path that I'm on right now. There's all these other things that, like, one of the pressures could be that we have 4 kids now. I think that might be, we had an unexpected child who's a blessing, but she was unexpected. And that is an additional, like, income financial pressure. And I think some people might even have difficulty pointing that out. And again, this is not a slight against our daughter. I think we're blessed that we have her, but it is something that it's like, oh, now we have that extra pressure where it's like, we need to make more money because we have another mouth to feed, and right?
So this mentality that you're referring to, and listen, I don't know the statistics on this. I heard it from a guy who referred to it. So this could be wrong. So just putting the caveat there. However, my understanding is that if you poll people, some people are like, I don't want to have kids because I'll make less money and I'll be less successful. But they've done studies apparently, and the research indicates that married people tend to make more money and have more success than single people, and married people with kids tend to have even more success and more money and make more financially than the other 2 cohorts.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is because you feel like you have no choice.
Those societal pressures.
You're not even societal pressures, but there's very practical pressures of like, listen, I want my kids. If I want 4 kids to go to university with like minimal debt, I need to get a better job. So I need to do X, Y, or Z. Like, I could tell you right now, before we had our 3rd kid, I was not really like, oh yeah, I want to go do a whole bunch of extra post-secondary education. And then that kind of dawned on me that, hey, I'll do this for my kids. So that was a motivational force that drove me to want to do it. And then it was like, oh, it would be cool if I had these additional letters behind my name because reasons, I don't know. But that was a secondary
reasons.
Yeah, I mean, really, at the end of the day. But that was like not a primary driver when I decided to start doing additional education. And it's still not. If I go and do my PhD, then that's definitely probably going to be like partly ego driven for sure.
Right. No, I completely agree with that piece. So now we're going down the path of the less traveled or untraveled, or the the gravel road that you've seen in a horror movie. Okay, maybe not the gravel road that you've seen in a horror movie, but we're at a crossroads. And, some of the most pivotal people have traversed some of these crossroads or these untraveled paths with grace, poise, and have become quite the expert and prolific individual. From someone like Vera Wang, who at 40 couldn't find a wedding dress and now is a commercial success, to the Oprah Winfrey's or Steve Jobs of the world, they all traversed paths that were uncharted. Think about some of the greatest advocates that are out there, from the Rosa Parks to the AOCs and Bernie Sanders of the world. Those people are charting some unprecedented paths. So it seems like the next progression is really embracing some of the zigzags. Well, I can give an example of a nonlinear path that I took because it was risky, and it was, I guess, risky at the time, but I chose to chart that path anyway. So, for example, anybody who knows or listened to me before knows that I was in a terrible work situation. I think, workplaces, they really just seem to kind of put you in a bind. And it was because, again, it's tied to your finances and all these other perceptions. If you're not working, what are you doing? How can you take care of your family? Are you like a good wife? Or all those horrible things coming down on you. So I remember thinking to myself that, I had this issue that was happening at work. I was being gaslit. And I knew I had to leave this role because if I didn't, my mental health was continuing to suffer. So I chose, I guess, what would have been the unbeaten path or the non-walked path of quitting with no prospects. I was just like, I don't have anything lined up, but my health is more important. So I quit my job, and, that's where I guess everything really changed for me. I decided to say, kind of screw these people and start talking about things that really meant a lot to me, and really actually calling out the bad actors, particularly in healthcare, because there's a lot of silencing, a lot of poor behavior that is allowed in healthcare, and I'm sure it's probably pervasive in all forms of different jobs. And I just thought it was a time to call it out, and that was a huge risk, and it kind of paid off, right?
100%. I mean,
and it wouldn't work for everybody, and I'm not saying that this is everybody's. This is the drum that you have to beat to, but I think that, sometimes charting those courses, or, maybe I guess it was a silver lining that, I didn't stay in that job because I was able to, protect my own mental health, and thereby, starting a podcast, having conversations, talking to other people about mental health. Maybe that started changing other people's lives. And, it was not the path that I thought that I'd be on, but it was the path that I was led down, and it was an important one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was on the sidelines, I guess, to a large extent while you were making all these choices. And while at the same time, I mean, I was and still am incredibly proud of you for everything that you've done, and genuinely mesmerized that you're able to do that, which is even more it's compounded by the fact that I struggle so much thinking outside of the box. Despite having a different neurology, I still feel like I have to do all the things. I literally can't think of a way to break out of that mold. My brain is still very much well, just get more degrees, and then eventually you'll be something else, and then you'll be able to be self-sufficient and be able to do it sustainably. There's also the part of me that is so afraid of uncertainty or intimidated by uncertainty that I look at you just diving head first into all that uncertainty, and it's we're a completely different species. Because I'm just I don't understand how she could do all that. I mean, again, I give you all your flowers, and it makes me super proud and inspires me and stuff like that, but also at the same time I'm just I don't know if I could do that.
That is a really good place to segue, because I think that, talking about all of these atypical experiences and this uncharted path, but I think it's good to recognize And Jordan even recognized within himself the fact that navigating change is still really challenging, and seeing those uncertainties can be very scary. And I think that's a really good self-actualization point to say, hey, although I've watched my loved one navigate uncertainty and this crazy situation, it's okay to be like, yeah, that is super scary. And I don't know if I'm ready to go through that right now. But maybe what we should be thinking about is that you don't have to go through it alone, and that you can navigate those situations with somebody else, a loved one, a friend, a peer, a coach, a therapist. I think the next piece is, how do we move forward? One of the things I've probably never acknowledged is when I was going through all of that stuff, it was really scary. And I was very fortunate to have the support of others. So let's do this together, because I think that we should navigate life's uncertainties as a community. But I don't know if it's that you're not able to, because you've been on this journey with me. And there's been just nothing but uncertainty, but it's just like, all right, so in the face of it, like, what do we do now? And I think this is where we should talk about, like, what we should do is like redefine what success looks like and how we navigate uncertainty, right? So what are some of those practical things that we do, knowing that that we're going to live an atypical life, that we're going to live a life that's nonlinear. Like, we know it's not linear. So that means we have to redefine what success looks like. So if success isn't just someone's personal worth, then what actually is success, and what does that look like for you, in relation and away from these societal benchmarks? Because I think at the end of the day, people can throw up whatever they want on social media and they can live miserable, horrible lives. But what's more important is, like, what is success for you? What is success for me? What is success for that other person who might be listening? Because it doesn't and shouldn't be tied to your wealth, but it should be like, at the end of the day, what you have control over, what's going to make you happy, right? And I think and we just have to move and shift away from this expectation, knowing that there's this illusion that life is supposed to be like this, and move away from that to be like, okay, so we know that that's not how it's going to be, and we need to redefine what success looks like. I think about, what advice would I have given to myself or someone else who feels discouraged because they feel like they're not following the path that they envision. I feel like there's always time. And I know there's this whole, like, we were laughing about it today about, like, time as this thing that, maybe we shouldn't, what was it? What did Mariah Carey say? That she doesn't honor time. I don't know, something along those lines. But, maybe she's kind of onto something. We think that it's like the best of our years have to be in our 20s and 30s, and in our 40s and 50s, we should be lounging and whatever. And it's like, maybe that's just a societal expectation and a pressure that's not actually a real one. And maybe some of the best years are growing up are in our 40s and 50s, where we're actually starting to realize all the falseness of those expectations, what we thought we needed to have. Like, I feel like
the hilarity of it is that most people are more content, primarily because resources are more secured. They don't have to worry about as much. Their kids are now more self-sufficient. People are at their most quote unquote miserable in terms of all the demands being put on them in their 20s and 30s, right? They have their health and they have their vitality and all that other stuff, but there's also a lot of, like, and maybe this is something that should be addressed more fully. Like, they have, like, these expectations that they have to jump through all these hoops.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to talk about kind of like, what are some of the things that would be helpful in these instances, in terms of, when someone's feeling stuck, or, things that I might have tried, and just kind of, I think the first thing is mindset, right? Like, thinking about what has come in, like, what is the perceived threat? What is the perceived change that's coming in? And instead of seeing it as like a threat, maybe we see it as, I know I hate this, as an opportunity. And actually, who used to say this a lot? Maybe it was one of my bosses. I think it was Fred, but he was just like, oh, whenever you see a challenge, see it as an opportunity. And I thought it was hokey. It's actually a really good way to think about stuff. And I think most of it is our mindset. Our minds are the ones that are telling us, like you had mentioned about, the theory behind the stripes and whatever. Like, it's our mindsets that put us in these places where we believe that, this change has come is insurmountable and we can't do anything. And I think one of the things is just trying to have this idea behind a growth mindset. And again, we could have another episode where we talk about like what that actually means, but it's really about just opening your mind to the possibility of seeing things a different way. So it's like, this happened. Okay, well, now what do I do? And how can I turn this into an opportunity into doing something else? So I think that's probably one of the things that we can also, look at. I think the other piece would probably be emotional regulation. So I'm probably not the best part. You're laughing. In terms of emotional regulation. Like, I think this is probably a part that I struggle with, and you do actually way better in relation to this, where it's just like, when the change or this idea of, life should be this way when it comes, I'm learning to just kind of acknowledge the fact that it's like, okay, this has happened. The next piece is to like process it, to sit down and be like, okay, now I know this is here. Let me just sit down and just kind of take it all in like a sponge. And then the other piece would be to like manage your emotions as opposed to suppressing them. I am a hothead, right? You know this. I've actually gotten way better over time, but like you're shaking your head. I've gotten better over time, but I'd say that still again, the hardest part is not to let it drive me, right? Not drive me, like motivate me, not to let, whether it's fear, anxiety, anger, or any of these kind of negative emotions that are not making me do anything. Because sometimes those emotions come in and yeah, they can be helpful. And sometimes they do propel you to do something, but sometimes they don't. They just let you sit and stew and you're in your head about it and you're not doing anything. So again, it's that whole, like that piece, right?
I think it's important when you talk about emotional regulation to also have be clear-eyed about how our emotion regulation system works. And so like there's a very, very overly simplified version because our brains are vastly complex, but it kind of it kind of explains what I'm talking about. So if you picture our emotions as a thermometer, green at the bottom, yellow, orange, red, that's stress thermometer, right? That's not anything else. It's just stress. And then just imagine a dotted line, a hatched line between orange and yellow. So it's important to know that where you start on that thermometer it's never at the bottom of green for anybody really, unless you're like super zen or monumentally high. But I mean, where nobody has zero stress. Very, very few people have zero stress. So let's just say that where you start on the thermometer is based on a bunch of factors that generally are beyond your control, especially when you're younger, but also when you're older, like genetics, environmental factors, neonatal environment, where you lived, where you went to school, all those things. Like there's lots of things that have shaped how our stress system works that are way beyond our control. Right. So what happens is when you hit that hatch line, you pass green, you pass yellow, and then you're starting to go to orange or red. That's when you become reactive. And that's where big feelings start to demonstrate themselves. That's essentially as soon as you cross from from yellow into orange, that's typically when your fight, flight, or freeze or fawn coping skills start kicking in. You're no longer forward thinking in terms of your future self tomorrow. You're just going to your brain's just going to try and get you through that stressful situation. So the goal, generally speaking, of emotional regulation is to try to stay below the line. Because in that case, there's a reason, folks, why I went through this demonstration. Because in the greeny yellow, that's where you're still able to think about your future yourself and your future relationships as well. So in that state, you're still able to have conversations. You're still, even if you're mad or upset or sad, whatever the emotion is. And again, stress can be anything, excitement, whatever. It just happens to be that we're very reactive when emotions are powerful. And so what we want to try to do in life is to try and stay below the dotted line as much as we can. And that's where the skills to come in, right? And so things can come, like in stressors, it's important to note, come from outside, like tests, like taxes, like whatever, car accidents or illnesses or whatever, but stress also is generated from within because the brain generates its own stress based on the way it sees the world. So if you see yourself as inherently incompetent or unworthy, that's going to lead to increased levels of stress. Right, and the lability of your stress, meaning that your ability, your how fast you run up the thermometer, is also dependent on a bunch of factors. So, how do we stay below it, and how do we adjust our set point down? Right, and those are things we'll get into in future episodes, I'm sure, if we want. In my world, you have multiple tools, and they. Mindfulness, so DBT, so there's dialectical behavioral therapy, which would be mindfulness practices, which are focusing on being in the present moment, training your brain to realize how distracted and negative and all these things it could be, because we're largely unaware of those facts of our brain. So mindfulness draws your attention to the fact that your brain is and
it's hard to do.
Extremely hard.
Right.
And people think it's this very passive thing.
It's a whole episode on its own.
100%. So I'm not going to go all whole hog into mindfulness. That's one of the skills. DBT also includes breathing exercises and other skills that you can use to...
What's DBT?
I already said dialectical behavioral therapy.
Okay.
So that's kind of dealing with stress in the moment and how do we get rid of those sensations.
We have a therapist, guys.
Indeed. And then there's CBT, which is changing the way your brain thinks about itself and the world. And you talked about this earlier when you talked about if we have this shift in mindset about what our expectations should be. So the primary the premise behind CBT is the CBT triangle. So if you picture a triangle, at the top of the triangle, and they're all bidirectional. But for the sake of this purposes, I'll just talk about one direction because this is the one that most people get tripped up by. So at the top of the triangle are thoughts. Thoughts are what, according to the CBT model, thoughts impact feelings, or they cause feelings, and the feelings motivate behavior. So the thought is, if you have a catastrophic thought, because our ancestors, again, have this negativity bias. So when they have a thought about the future, it's usually not sunshine and rainbows. It's about what's going to go wrong and how can I protect you.
Right.
So the thought is, oh my God, I didn't study enough for this test. I'm going to fail. And then when I fail, I'm going to not get the GPA I want. And then I'm not going to get into the university I want. And then I'm not going to get the job I want. And then I'm not going to get the kids and the 2.5 kids and the significant other and the white picket fence and whatever. And then I'm going to die a loser.
Jeez.
Right? That is a catastrophic thought.
Right.
Right.
But it's not a true thought.
It's not a true thought. And this is that's the important.
Thank you, therapist. I was listening.
And that's not a true thought, but it is true enough to you that creates a correspondingly large feeling. And that feeling is extreme anxiety and also depression, because those are horrible thoughts to have about yourself. And then that creates the correspondingly large behavior, right? Everything in this system is fairly linear. So the behavior is, I'm going to either, and in this case, because it's such a strong emotion, it's actually going to run against your inclination. So
what does CBT actually do then?
So anyway, let me finish that. Okay. So what happens if the thought is so unrealistic and so big, it will lead you to not doing the thing. So instead of, my stress is going to motivate me to study harder, I'm just going to call in sick and not go do the test tomorrow. Okay. Right? CBT addresses it does many things, but in this model, it addresses the thought. And so through Socratic questioning, meaning that the therapist gets you to explicate that thought, and then they interrogate it nicely, of course. So they will ask you questions about it, like, is that a realistic thought? Are there circumstances under which that may not happen? And then they just keep on going at that thought until you keep on admitting, like Socrates did with so many people in Plato's various...
Lord, it's coming out now.
See?
Late at night, now you're bringing it up.
So the premise is that Socratic questioning, that interrogation of the thoughts, over time, because it doesn't happen in one day, you will rewire your brain's thought process, and you will learn to do that to yourself. So the therapist starts the process by interrogating the questions, and then you build the habit of interrogating these thoughts and not taking them for granted, because the thoughts unexamined will just lead to behaviors, and the feelings, and the feelings will run the behaviors. Your subconscious is running your life. When you start interrogating those thoughts, then you are able to modify your feelings, thereby modifying your behavior.
Right. So CBT essentially kind of is helping you. It's like cognitive reframing. It's taking that
That's
idea
a lot of
and
what it is.
shifting
Yeah.
your perspective on a situation, which again is very helpful when you think your life should be going like this and it takes this turn, right?
But it also takes time. That's why most CBT is prescribed for like 12 weeks, because neurons that fire together wire together, and we have these habits of mind where if we do something that we perceive as a mistake, we automatically jump on ourselves. You're so stupid. You should have known better. And then
Yeah.
what hopefully will happen after you do CBT is you'll catch yourself and you'll be like, whoa, is that realistic? Am I these things?
The other piece is that I think is important for folks to think about, and even just myself, is that self-compassion aspect. I do want to wrap it up because it is getting late and we have kids to put down, but self-compassion, like we don't treat ourselves very kindly. We don't talk to ourselves very kindly. And I think that's something that we should recognize. And I think it's good to recognize it in oneself and others, in other people's, but we just don't take that moment to be like, wow, I would never say this to my kids. I would never say that to my husband. So why am I saying it to myself? And I think it's like we have to just give ourselves that grace to extend kindness in a very difficult situation or a difficult time, to be like, this effing sucks. It's really hard. And I'm going to just eat this piece of cake and have popcorn, even though I have IBS, and just cry a little bit and be like, woe is me. I'm not going to stay there, but take the time to take care of myself. Cause I think the other piece, and this is what I'm trying to work on too, is I know I hate exercising. Okay. I don't like it, but I know when I do it and I do it consistently, it makes me feel so much better. And to me, that's self-care to me, because like, that is literally something I'm doing for myself, even though I know like I don't like it. I know how it makes me feel. So that for me is self-compassion. Also, of course, like eating snacks and stuff, like it's self-compassion, but like it's not the right thing to do. I'm not saying go out and eat your fit. Yes, I am. But you know what I'm trying to say. But it's just like affording yourself that opportunity to take care of yourself.
Well, and not to be too clinical, but in DBT, those are things that you are allowed to do. So you are allowed to. You can just
don't tell me what I can do. I do it on myself. I do what I want.
You can distract. You're allowed distracting yourself. You're allowed listening to something you love, watching a movie that makes you feel good, going out for a walk, doing things you enjoy.
So when I'm really stressed out, you know what I do? I watch horror movies.
Yeah, because they're extremely distracting, and also you get that release. The cathartic release that you're not the one being murdered. Exactly. So one thing I just wanted to quickly add, I'm not going to go on and on about it, but it's important to note, is that sometimes visualization does help when we're working on self-compassion. So imagining yourself, like this is one I particularly like if you imagine yourself in an amphitheater, the seats are all dark, you're sitting in the middle, the person in the middle is your ideal self. That is you, superhero version you. Okay, right? In the amphitheater. Right. But you're able to call up other versions of yourself from the audience. So for instance, if there's something bad that happened to you when you were 9 years old that you still beat yourself up over, say somebody bullied you, and you've been wishing for years that you would have punched that person in the face and you would have showed them who was boss. So you call up that little boy, that version of yourself, and bring them to the center of the amphitheater in the spotlight with the ideal version of you, the best version of yourself. Right. And you talk to that young boy. And sometimes if your imagination isn't that great, go find a picture of you at that age, because you'll be blown away that you forget how vulnerable you were at these ages or vulnerable at these times. And you talk to that person as if they were separate from you. Right. And it's amazing that the things that you say once you separated them from you, that the things you say are actually the things a therapist would say. The non-judgmental, encouraging,
it's the
and
whole
loving.
Piece of like, we're so much better at giving other people advice 100%. Than we are taking our own advice. But in that instance, like the example that you're giving, you're literally giving yourself the best advice that you need. It's crazy.
And then forgive yourself.
Such a good example.
Yeah, I love the amphitheater.
Oh, I like that. I'm gonna try that. Yeah. Anyways,
all without a master's degree.
See, just self-taught. Anyways, the last two pieces that I want to say is obviously social support. So leaning on folks and friends, coworkers, if you want to go down that route, but just people that you trust to kind of have this conversation, just recognizing the importance of connection and community. And again, this is the other reason why we're doing Atypical, because we want to build community, we want to build connection, and that's why it'll also be a bi-directional podcast, because we want to hear from people to be like, hey, what you said really helped me last week, or could you explain this or touch on this subject a little bit more, or even just have a conversation with us on the show. I think social community and building community is so important right now. There's one of the things actually I was reading recently is the high number of people that are suffering from loneliness. It's like loneliness is like an epidemic right now, where there's so many people that are feeling disconnected and don't know who to connect with, or are making connections in places that are not the best. And we've seen that, where people find community in places where they truly aren't being very community-like. But those are the people that are reaching out. These are the people who they're finding solace in, even if it's not the right group. And I think it's important that, we do build community. And I think that this is a beautiful way that, we don't have to be face to face or whatever. Like, my camera's gone now, so you're just listening. But it's just a matter of like making it an option that you can have another person that you can connect with, even though we don't know each other, but we can share the same feeling or instance, or express that, I've been there too. And I think building community is really important. Last but not least is that whole idea. I think we touched on it a little bit in talking about, mindset, but just being adaptable and psychological flexibility. So just again, CBT, being able to adjust our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and responses to new situations. And we made it. So, like we said, life just isn't linear. It is full of twists, turns, setbacks, unexpected opportunities, and it's really about how we look at it. There is this illusion of linearity, and we need to get over this pervasive societal expectation of life as a linear path, because we know that it is just not. We also know that our brains are hardwired to think of the worst case scenario. So we have to think about those workarounds and those strategies and tips, knowing that we have that biology and catching ourselves in the moment. We also have those times where we know that those expectations we have don't match up, and those pressures can become insurmountable. So it's important that we go back to those strategies and mechanisms that we have in terms of coping. We know the feeling of not charting the course can cause us to have mental health stress. So what do we need to do about it? First and foremost, we need to embrace the fact that, life isn't going to be linear. We need to embrace the zigzag. Think about your own journey. There have been unexpected twists and turns, but have they all been bad? We also have to think about how we redefine success and how we can move forward towards practical and philosophical implications of accepting that life is not linear. So let's give it a try. Accept and reframe the change. Stay curious and open. Focus on what you can control. Acknowledge your feelings. Don't get trapped like I do sometimes in terms of your emotions. Think about that scale and see where you are and how you can manage your stress. And when things become overwhelming, that you seek support and help from other people. We talked about different therapies that can help, like CBT and DBT, and negative self-talk is so detrimental. We sometimes can be our own enemy. So think of that example of the amphitheater. Give it a try. How would you talk to your younger self or another version of yourself, and talk to that person the way that they should be talked to? We have to think about how we talk to ourselves and encourage ourselves to have positive self-talk. Make sure you practice self-compassion and prioritize self-care, and always try to be mindful. And I know mindfulness is a practice that's very difficult, and we'll talk about it on other episodes coming up. Lastly, let's be reminded that we need to accept change when it comes. We know that change is inevitable. Change is the only thing that is a constant, and resisting it will be detrimental. We need to be open to new possibilities and willing to adapt our plans as needed. It's a journey, but we're on the journey together. Let's get back to the episode. And yeah, it's something that takes time. I would say that, it's not like a new situation is not going to come our way, because I tell you, it's just like I would tell people that if I was ever to have a movie made on my life, people would be like, what? Like, what is this, a Tyler Perry movie? Like, no, it's actually,
it's better written.
Better written. But the thing is, it's just like, you know, all of these things are not going to change overnight. Your thoughts are going to change. But I guess, like, with practice and with understanding, even just with this first episode, calling it like life is not linear, just that saying is going to get people to say, hey, yeah, that is absolutely true. And we need to start really tearing down some of these ideas behind, you know, social media, these depictions, these perceptions and expectations, and just that a lot of it's fluff. And at the end of the day, the only person who it affects is you. Nobody else cares, just you. And I think that's where we want to shift people to having more compassion and more self-compassion and, you know, greater self-awareness. So if you like this episode about life is not being linear, please leave us a message. You can send me a message on SpeakPipe. And how you can find me is you can just go to my website, www.amievarley.com or www.amiearchibald-varley.com, and click on the Atypical Amie podcast in the top right hand corner. So once you click that, you scroll down the page and you'll see, please send Amie a message on SpeakPipe. Send me a message there. We can incorporate it into the next episode and have a conversation and dialogue about what you might be thinking about. Again, the next episode is ghosting, so please get ready and send us your questions. Send us your examples of being ghosted. Tell us if you've ghosted somebody and why you've ghosted someone. I think it'll be a great conversation because it's something that's happening quite frequently, and you know, it's kind of crazy that there's been a lot of science around it. So, like I said, send me a message on SpeakPipe. Stay tuned. Thank you for listening and tuning in to Atypical Podcast with Amie Archibald-Varley, and my husband joined in, so Jordan Varley as well. Thank you for all of your tips. It's great to have a therapist on, so I guess we'll probably be hearing more from you.
I mean, if I got the job, for sure.
Hired. Bing! I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you'll tune in and send us a line for episodes for next week because, like I said, we'll be talking about all things ghosting. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for tuning in and see you in the next couple weeks.